Welcome to the show, friends, and Greg Koukl here, thanking you for the privilege of spending some time with you today. And again, my pleasure to talk with you about anything dealing with ethics, values, and religion. That's what we do here, with a view of defending classical Christianity and classical Christian values. The show is called Stand to Reason, as we stand and we reason, and we think that matters. Good thinking matters in important issues. I think emotions are fabulous. The more, the better, kind of. But emotions make life delicious. But it is reason properly used that makes life safe. So we're addressing those most important issues, employing those tools. Got a full line of callers here. Just going to jump into them in a moment. I just want to share briefly something I saw recently that, it makes me wistful a little bit. That wistful being wishing for an earlier time makes me feel how much times have changed. I was in a Cracker Barrel in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 2 weeks ago. Week and a half ago now, I guess, and had breakfast there before an event. Cracker Barrels there in the South, we don't have them on the West Coast, do we? We don't have Cracker Barrels around here, do we? Maybe a few. Okay, they're creeping out here, but they're big. They're big hits in the South and they Bible Belt kind of thing, and north of there. I guess I've gone to one in Illinois, but they're fun. They have great kind of comfort food approach and lots of quaint thinging on the walls. You can sit out in front and rock in the rockers and that kind of thing. So I'm sitting there by myself, waiting for my breakfast, and right next to my table, the wall has various odds and ends from antiquity or recent antiquity, lots of times posters and the like, and right next to me was a poster I took a picture of advertising Bull Durham. Now, Bull Durham is a smoking tobacco, so I'm going to read the text for you in a minute, and please just ignore the, what almost sounds ridiculous now, appeal to smoke tobacco to be healthy, because that's part of this. And there was some misunderstanding about that, the early part of the 20th century. But there's something else that I want you to see here in this ad. And the ad makes a certain kind of appeal. It appeals to a certain person, or let me put it this way, it presumes some particular values for their ad to be effective, values that I do not think are significant to people today. So let me just read it to you. And the headline, as it were, says, "In every walk of life, you'll find good old Bull." Now, I guess you couldn't put that today. People would misunderstand your meaning. Then it writes underneath, and here is the appeal: "Men of action, men with red blood in their veins, who do the world's work and do it well, learn to appreciate things at their real worth. They're not fooled by frills. They demand honest value. These are the millions of men all over the earth who find complete, healthful enjoyment and lasting satisfaction in Bull Durham handmade cigarettes." And then there's more advertising. Now, of course, we kind of chuckle like, isn't that quaint? Yeah, like healthful enjoyment, millions of men all over the earth. I mean, it sounds a little silly, but it was a serious ad 60 or 70 years ago. But I just want you to notice something about the appeal. I think for many people, even the appeal, men of action, men with red blood in their veins, who do the world's work and do it well, I think that kind of appeal is itself is discomforting for some people, and it is. I'm not going to get into a large harangue about this, and I think this can be overdone, but I think it is largely because our culture has been feminized. The men have been feminized. I'll just tell you, I liked this ad. I like this idea. I think the notion of men of action, men with red blood in their veins, who do the world's work and do it well. It doesn't mean that women can't work. It doesn't mean that women can't make a difference. But it means that there's something unique about men that's part of male human nature that wants to plant a flag, make a difference, fight a battle, overcome some foe, do something meaningful and significant, get the job done. It's our job. Do the job. That's something that is in man, that is natural, it's built in, and that this is meant to appeal to. Now, I think it is there, and I think sometimes we can still appeal to it, but I think it's largely been buried by a different ethic that makes men feel a little uncomfortable with, I guess they used to call it feeling their oats, though I don't mean it in a sexual way. Oh, I think it's good when men feel their oats, when a genuine, good, manly, masculine desires surge through their good red blood. They want to do the work. They want to get it done. They are embracing challenge. They are making a contribution. These are all things here that I think are part of being male, and I think were obvious to men in an earlier time, but I think are not. Something else is being appealed to, and maybe feminized isn't even the word. Men are they're dumbed down. They're made lazier. They're just we'll take care of you. You don't have to do it. Instead of rise to the challenge. Yeah. You notice the emphasis away from competitive sports for kids? No, we're not going to compete. We're not going to keep score. Or if we keep score, then the other team is going to get free runs or free goals or something, so nobody feels bad. Instead of who can beat the other person or the other team, it's a different mentality. I don't like that personally. I think it takes something important out of us, takes away the urge to excel, and it also removes the opportunity for our children to deal with disappointment and to maybe realize that different people have different skills, and maybe sports is not one of theirs and they can excel in something else or something like that. But I remember my daughter crying about something the other day, and my response, and maybe some of you think this wasn't very kind, but I did hold her. I gave her a hug, and I said something, well, that's the way it goes sometimes. Sometimes you fail. Sometimes somebody else wins. That's the way it is, honey. And anyway, just got me thinking as I saw the Bull Durham advertisement in the Cracker Barrel. Incidentally, if you think about seeing old movies about earlier times, and the scripts and everything were written in an earlier time when our ideas had not changed as much, sometimes scripts written now about old times reflect modern sensibilities and not the sensibilities of the time. But I'm thinking of two movies right now. One was Old Yeller, came out in the 50s. Remember the Tommy Kirk, the young actor who played the 13-year-old boy or something, whose father went away, and it was his job to take care of the farm and protect mom and his younger brother, and to do the job and plow the field and bring in the crop and shoot the bear and kill the wild pig and do all of that stuff. And what did he do? He stepped right up. He said, "Pa, I'm up to it. I can do it." He wanted to do that. That was the mentality then. And the other movie I think of is How Green Was My Valley, which was 1938 or thereabouts, a Best Picture actually that year. And Roddy McDowall, the young actor playing a boy as part of a coal mining family in a Welsh village, and how he wanted to grow up and be like his brothers and his dad who worked in the coal mine. He wanted to go from childhood to adulthood, which was the standard way of growing, I guess. None of this teenager business where you go crazy for 10 years. And children were encouraged with this expectation of joining the ranks of adults. And that looked different for young women and young men, but it still was the idea of stepping up. And I think this old Bull Durham ad captures that. Okay, enough of that. Let's go to Fontana, California. And hey, Paul, welcome to the show.
Hi, Greg. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can, loud and clear. I should say loudly and clearly.
All right. Well, it is an honor to talk to you. I really enjoy your show, and
thanks.
I want to start off with a quick compliment. I don't know if you remember, about 7 or 8 months ago, you had a caller who was steamrolling you, and I remember hearing, I don't remember the topic, but I remember hearing you kind of warned him a few times, and then finally you hung up on him. So I remember hearing that podcast and just celebrating in my car, saying, "You go, Greg, awesome job." So,
well, I mean, just for the record, I don't, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we just kind of summarily hung up on him. I went through my steps, and then I realized that this is not a person I can really continue having a conversation with. So the third step of dealing with a steamroller is to leave them, and that's what I ended up doing. I said, this is not going to be productive, and let them go. But, well, good. I'm glad it was a good
I'll
example.
try not to interrupt you then. Anything. So,
well, there are sometimes benevolent steamrollers that are just excitable types, but they're not really hostile. They just want to jump in. So that I deal with them a little differently. But
okay. Well, anyways, my question: I know you're getting this a lot, nowadays. The talk about homosexuality and how it's viewed in our culture and how Christians are dealing with it. I just have been noticing. Maybe it's because I live in the American media bubble, but it seems like all the homosexuals in media and that we see are kind of wealthier, more affluent socioeconomic status. And I guess my question for you is, do you stand to reason that maybe, I know Alan Schleman kind of specializes in this, but do you guys have any data about, is there a large homosexual crowd in third world countries?
Yeah.
And if there is, are they making as big a deal about their rights as they're here in America? And just kind of wonder how that
plays out. Yeah, I got a couple thoughts on that. One is that when you see the well-to-do homosexuals in the media and everything else, remember, pretty much everybody you see in the media, heterosexual or homosexual, is well-to-do. I mean, this is a well-paying kind of it's a well-paying profession. However, I think the statistics will bear up that in our culture, at least, those who are homosexuals occupy a little higher strata economically. I think I remember seeing some things like that. And if for no other reason, they don't support families, by and large.
Right.
So, and especially if you have a domestic partnership of some sort, you have two income-earning people, and they are the income is not being drained off by having children, characteristically. So that may affect it a little bit. But I think the bigger point, though, is there something about Western culture that has a role on this or whatever, and therefore it wouldn't be the same in, say, developing nations. I don't think that's the case. I think that across my understanding, based on the best evidence available, and more evidence on this particular issue is coming out all the time, is that homosexuality is not genetic, it's not constitutional, it's developmental. That there are dynamics in the early years of a child that influences their gender preference, and these same dynamics are at play in lots of other cultures, regardless of the socioeconomic status. In fact, I lived in Thailand for a while, and one of the things that two things we were told is, one, there is a lot more physical affection between males in Thailand than in, say, America, and we are not to infer from that something sexual. However, now that our guard has lowered a little bit so that we don't read into it something that maybe is not really there, we also had to be reminded that there were homosexuals in Thailand, and sometimes they take advantage of this cultural ethic to make advances on Westerners. So, in other words, they'll kind of sidle in, and the Westerners thinking, well, this is just part of the culture. So personal anecdote there, and I know Alan can tell you that in Muslim cultures, homosexuality is actually a significant problem. And the reason it's a problem is because of the religious practices make discourage the availability of women. Let's just put it that way. They're covered up and they're isolated. So men are tossed together with men a lot. Men have aggressive sexual natures, and consequently, they will find a way of expressing their sexuality even if the most appealing outlet, a female, is not available. And so they will redirect. This happens in prisons as well. So, and prisons where you have a lot of that kind of activity, this is not a high socioeconomic strata, you know. So I think that the behaviors here, and some might make a distinction between people who have a homosexual orientation and people who engage in behaviors that are same-sex sexual behaviors. That may be a fair distinction. I'm just not going there right now. I'm just, with regards to the behaviors, you can see behaviors occur in all different strata, and you see the orientation, if you will, if you're comfortable with that way of putting it, that appears in all different strata too. Let's go to break, and then we'll be back with more of your calls and comments on Stand to Reason.
You can find STR on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and Pinterest. Interact with STR staff, post comments, get involved with other like-minded Christians. Want to know what is going on with STR? Speaking events, new podcasts, resources, and articles? Follow STR online. You can find all of our social media connections at str.org.
All right, Levi, let me get you here. Levi, I don't think I've ever had a Levi, or maybe one or two, unless you've called him before.
No, this is my first time.
Wow. Well, welcome, Levi.
I don't come across too many myself, and I work in a hospital and see a lot of names. So,
yeah.
Well, hey, I just wanted to thank you for your ministry and all that you guys do there. And
you're welcome.
Just wanted to get right to my question here. Give you a little bit of the background information, if that's okay.
Sure.
I headed up an effort in my church to implement an apologetics program as sort of an alternative adult/young adult Bible class. Well, not a Bible class uniquely, but just to address those sorts of issues. And myself and two other gentlemen have headed up that effort. And we've been through our whole curriculum one time, and we got some feedback from the people that regularly attended our class about maybe some possible additional topics that we didn't cover the first time around. And one of the ones that came up was just the topic of cults in general, Jehovah's Witness, Mormon, things like that. Well, in an effort to sort of lighten the load of me and the two other guys that are heading this up, I'm trying to sort of encourage any members of my church that have a strong interest in any of these areas to develop some lessons on them to build themselves up, and then so that they could come teach us on those things that they're interested in. It just so happens, in this particular case, there's a female in my church who regularly engages Jehovah's Witnesses in her neighborhood and has a strong interest in the cults. And, of course, it's a sort of a touchy subject within Christendom about the role of women in teaching. And I was just kind of curious of what your thoughts were on that, because two of us that are heading up this effort think it's a conversation worth having. But the third person is, he's, at least right now, I mean, he's expressed his,
his doubt. Well, I'll tell you, let me start out with just a little anecdotal piece of information. Amy Hall, who's operating the phones right now in Melinda's absence, our premier blogger here at Stand to Reason, and she does a lot of things too, other than that. She's actually has an expertise in this area, dealing with some cults, and we've had her teach on that. Okay, and I have no qualms whatsoever, because I don't think that there's a good biblical case that can be made against it. Now, usually the case that is brought up, or the verse that's brought up, is in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Okay?
Exactly. Right.
And
he brought that up.
So I don't know of any other passage, though, that would inveigh against women teaching in the church. I don't know of any passage that inveighs against it.
Can I just mention one real quick that he mentioned also? 1 Corinthians 14:34 about women remaining silent. And that's the only two that he cited. So
if you want to, I think that may be in a separate category, because it seems like arguably there's cultural circumstances there. But see, if your friend is going to invoke that verse in that way, well, then there are a whole lot of changes that are going to have to take place in the church.
Right.
Because women are to be silent. So you have women on one side of the church and men on the other side of the church, and men can make the noise and the women can't make any noise, and they have to go home and ask their husbands about things, So, it seems that if you take that at face value, this creates all kinds of rather bizarre consequences. So
Right.
I'm not going to deal with that at the moment.
Okay.
If he wants to bring that up, then he's going to have to answer for some of these other things too, if he's going to follow that consistently. Let me just look at this 1 Timothy passage. And here I'm going to kind of take the roof off just a little bit. So I'm going to read it in the New American Standard, and I'm going to then assume the interpretation that says women should not be able to teach in the church, and I'm going to just see where that leads if we take this at what appears to be face value. Verse 8, therefore I want the men in every place to pray, lifting up holy hands without wrath and dissension. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing. Well, wait a minute. All of a sudden, already we got a problem. What the men are supposed to do is the praying, and the women are to dress modestly, discreetly, not with braided hair, gold or pearls or costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as befits a woman making a claim to godliness. Okay. Women can't pray. The men do the praying. Oh, well, okay. That's what it appears to be, at least. 11. Let a woman quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness. But I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. All right, so let's just see. Is your friend married?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it looks to me on, I think, his read of this verse, then his wife must sit quietly in submission under you and take instruction from you and indeed every other man in the local church. Because if this is referring to women vis-a-vis men, she is to quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness, not to teach or exercise authority over man, but to remain quiet. So who is she getting that instruction from? The men teach her. It's like the pecking order is all men over all women in this regard. That strikes me as a little bit odd.
I agree.
All right. Now, just a little insight into the Greek. The word being used here for men is aner, A-N-E-R, and the word being for women is gune. Okay? The word aner and gune can be translated men and women, respectively, or husband and wife. And as a point of information, whenever it is clear in a text that aner and gune are connected in a relationship, it is always translated husband and wife, except this passage and 1 Corinthians 10, where it says the man is over the woman and Christ is over the man, that part. All right?
Okay.
Now, I'll tell you my conviction here. My conviction here is that this is not talking about men and women in the church. It's talking about husbands and wives. It's talking about the spiritual authority that husbands have over their wives. And so with that in mind, I want you to notice something in the words again. In verse 11, let a woman, it doesn't say women, it says a woman quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness. Now, what man-woman relationship, in biblical terms, do the biblical writers emphasize entire submission?
The way it sounds like the marriage relationship.
It does. Ephesians 5, 1 Peter 3, Titus 2 or 3. It's in there quite a bit. All right. But I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. And why is she not to exercise authority over a man? It's because the husband is rather the authority over his wife biblically. Now, there are people who are egalitarian in their approach to these things. They disagree. And with them, I disagree, okay?
Yeah.
Just looking at this passage. Now, let's do the alternate translation here. Let a wife quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness, but I do not allow a wife to teach or exercise authority over a husband, but to remain quiet. Does that sound odd, out of place, unusual? Biblically, no.
No, right.
Sounds just like everything else. So I am convinced that this passage is not a passage prohibiting women from teaching in the church, but rather a passage that prohibits the usurping of the authority of the husband in a family situation. And that is that the husband is to be the spiritual leader of his wife and the family, just like he is to be the head of the house. Now, so this has to do with teaching. If you go to the next chapter, chapter 3, it talks about leadership. And I think that chapter 3 teaches that women should not be pastors, that is, head pastors, or in elder leadership positions in the church. That clearly is for men. But that comes from chapter 3, not chapter 2. So
and
I
also
see.
Titus correct about the qualifications of elder.
Yes, that appears to support that as well. So I think the reading that I offered is completely legitimate in virtue of the words and the practice of the translation, with odd exception here in the New American Standard, and I think it actually reads more naturally in light of other passages that talk about the husband-wife relationship. However, so that what that would mean is that a lady working in with you in the capacity you suggested would create no problems biblically at all. Now, if she was to be the head pastor of the church or on the elder board, that I think would be a problem, but not from chapter 2, rather chapter 3.
Great. Just to pray, I'm thinking, what about what if the woman's husband was in the class?
Well, I think the issue here in these verses is the role of spiritual authority over the man. I don't think that this has to do with the tenses
so the
there.
overall context, spiritual authority.
There's a difference between, and I think this is reflected in the verbs, okay? There's a difference between having occasion of instruction and being the teacher over, being the teaching authority over. So I don't think there's anything wrong with a husband learning something spiritually from his wife.
Sure.
But that doesn't make her the spiritual head of the family.
I understand completely. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what this person might say.
And you ought to. You want to anticipate the objections from the other side, and then see if you can answer them, because the objections may be good ones. If you can't answer them, then you may want to rethink. I think there's a good answer to that. And it is still in the wording here. Now, I have had people push back on this interpretation, but there you have it.
Oh, thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. And if I might, I mentioned to Melinda, I'm actually a Biola University Science and Religion graduate student right now.
Oh, no kidding. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm about to start my third semester. Just had the first residency this past summer. It was excellent.
Great.
I'm a busy person. I have 3 young kids, and I'm taking 4.5 years to finish the program. I was just kind of hoping maybe to, if you wouldn't mind maybe just speaking to the benefits of such a program and the need for these areas in the kingdom. Just maybe as a little pep talk.
Yeah, well,
very nice.
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Cool.
The program that you're in is who is the professor over that program?
Craig Hazen.
Oh, Craig Hazen.
I'm sorry, it's John Bloom.
Yeah, John Bloom. That's what I recalled. John Bloom is over that program. So there are 3 different master's programs that are kin to each other in a certain way over at Biola Talbot. One is the M.A. Phil, Philosophy of Religion and Ethics, that Melinda and I graduated from, Brett graduated from. The other is the M.A. in Apologetics under Dr. Hazen, and Amy Hall here at Stand to Reason and Derek White have graduated from that. So we had a deep bench. But there was another program, and it's the program you're in with John Bloom, and it's a science, give me the title again.
The MA in Science and Religion.
Science and MA in Science and Religion. And this is meant to focus in on that particular field. It turns out that the people who take these programs aren't people that are necessarily bound for some kind of professional position, but there are people that want to go deeper in thinking Christianity in areas that are of particular interest to them, whether it's science or whether it's apologetics or whether it's philosophy of religion. And though there are people who take these degrees and go on to PhD programs or maybe go into organizations like Stand to Reason, there are a lot of people that are just richly benefiting from these programs because of the education they get, the way their own convictions are built up, the improvement that it makes for them as a thinker, and it does make them available in the body of Christ, maybe a local body, to do other things. So the program you're in is the smallest of the three. I think Dr. Hazen's is the largest, and I think that the MA Phil is in the middle. Yours is the smallest of the three, but I'm glad to give it more visibility to encourage people to consider the MA in Science and Religion that Dr. Bloom oversees, because this is a huge area right now in our culture. And, of course, all the new atheists are beating up on Christians, largely with the stick of science. And for you to be able to get an advanced degree in an area, even if you stretch it out over a few years, and it took me 13 to get my MA Phil.
Makes me feel better already.
Yeah. Even if you stretch it out, to be able to give response to these people or help other Christians to give responses to a great place to be in. So I want to commend that program, all those programs at Biola, to folks. So good for you, Levi, and thank you for your call.
No, thank you, Greg. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Let's go to break. You're listening to Stand to Reason.
At Stand to Reason, we depend on the support of donors to carry on our mission to equip Christian ambassadors, and your non-cash donation items can help. You can transform your old cars, cell phones, or other items into ministry impact by donating them to Stand to Reason. Think of it. Because of your donation, Christians just like you will be able to effectively share their faith and change the lives of others forever. To make non-cash donations of all kinds to Stand to Reason, call iDonate at 877-897-4273. or go to idonate.com and visit STR's page. They'll take care of everything for you and Stand to Reason. Just call them at 877-897-4273 or visit idonate.com. Thank you very much for making Stand to Reason's work possible.
Final segment here at Stand to Reason. Got a couple callers on board, so let's see if we can get everybody in here. This is Edmond, Oklahoma. Is that right, Gary?
That is correct.
Well, thank you for calling today.
Greg, I want to ask you a question that my 18-year-old son asked me on Saturday, and it caused quite a stir.
Mm-hmm.
This question is, he's having some real problems with hell.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's not like we haven't all had problems with hell. I mean, come on.
That's right. Let's be honest. I'm with you on that.
Absolutely. But he got very, very emotional, and he's beginning to, have a lot of doubts, and he's dabbling in, Hitchens and Dawkins and stuff like that. And so he says, okay, he said, Dad, what about a girl who's abducted at 13 years old into sex slavery? And obviously we know that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
She's kept as a sex slave for 20 years, and then the guy brutally kills her. She never hears about Jesus. Does she go to hell? And, essentially, Greg, I responded to that saying, but Greg, actually, before I respond, I don't want to tell you how I responded. I really would really like you to respond first.
Well, of course, your response isn't going to influence mine, but that's all right. So.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well,
don't worry about me.
Well, had I been able to respond, because unfortunately this turned into one of those family dramas, where he was real emotional about it. And how I would have responded, though, was actually what I did say. I was asking Kyle, a hypothetical situation is always constructed to only give a certain number of facts to lead to a conclusion, and in your case, an unjust God.
Right.
But I said real life does not work that way. In real life, there are many, many, many more factors that you and I both cannot know, and which always influence a situation. And some of those factors include how God works in people's lives, even though we don't see it or know about it. And so I said it's impossible to really say in a situation like that exactly what happened because I don't know all of the facts. And he said, no, you're a coward. You're that's a cop out, blah, blah, blah. You just don't want to answer the question. And so anyway, Greg, how would you have handled that?
Yeah, well, let me compliment you. I think that your response, especially the beginning, your observation about these what ifs, is absolutely profound. That's exactly the case. That you can construct all kinds of scenarios that seem to be consistent with, say, Christian theology that make Christian theology look ridiculous. But it looks ridiculous precisely because a lot of details that are relevant to the assessment have been left out. And it's kind of a special pleading that's going on. That's like saying, okay, God's going to send Jews to hell just because they're Jews.
Right.
Well, if being a Jew means rejecting Jesus as Messiah, I see how you can connect the dots that way. They don't believe in Jesus because they're Jews, so they're going to hell, which means they're going to hell because they're Jews. But that isn't accurate. They're not going to hell because they're Jews. They're going to hell because they've broken God's law.
Right.
And in virtue of being committed to a Jewish way of viewing things, they have disqualified themselves from the free mercy of God that's being offered. But they've disqualified themselves. So you're absolutely right in pointing out that it is the way that you put the question that makes a huge difference in the perception of the legitimacy of the answer. So, and you could do the exact same thing with maybe his view. Let's just take a universalist view. And actually, this to me is more accurate. You could say, so in other words, okay, there is no hell. Everybody goes to heaven. That means the person who did the murdering of that woman he abused for all those years gets the same thing as the girl who did nothing but was innocently brutalized. They both end up exactly the same. They get the same result. I mean,
that's a good point. That's a great point.
And that actually is a response in which that entails no distortion. But and so there are always counters to these things. I mean, there's another side to the coin. Okay, now here's a couple of thoughts on the question. And I don't know the best way to play them out in your circumstance, but I'll just tell you the ones that popped into my head. I think the reason that this is problematic is because that it misunderstands some things. For example, it suggests that somehow the suffering that she experienced is meritorious. Well, because she suffered here, she shouldn't suffer there. Well, we're not saying that a person that suffers is going to get increased suffering in hell for no good reason. Here's a question that it might be asked. Why do you think hell exists? Well, the answer to that, the correct to the point answer, is because it accomplishes a good purpose and a just purpose. Well, a good purpose, which is justice. Which is justice. Right. Okay? So let's just say Osama bin, well, I can't use him because he had a wonderful childhood. He was a rich. I'm trying to think of somebody, and I easily imagine somebody who also had an awful childhood, and then their response to their awful childhood is they went out and brutalized and murdered. Hey, let's just take the guy who killed the girl in the illustration. Let's just say the guy who killed the girl, he also had a life like hers. And finally, when he grew up, he was able to murder the man who had enslaved him, and now he's chosen to enslave other people. So, should this person go to hell? Well, see, now this brings into another detail, and it's the thing that's not mentioned, that every person who has have miserable things happen to them are also responsible for miserable things in their own life, too. In some measure, we don't know what those happen to be, and you can kind of construct a scenario of this pristine individual who never did anybody ever harm and totally innocent all her life, was abused and then gets murdered. And well, look at God will never punish the innocent. This is the simple, straightforward affirmation we need to make to everyone who raises these kinds of questions. God will never punish the innocent. And that, if that's your concern, that God is going to punish an innocent person, he will never do that. Why would he punish an innocent person?
May I say something, Greg?
Sure.
Okay. I told Kyle, I said, people do not go to hell because they haven't accepted Jesus.
Right.
People only go to hell because they have done wrong things. They have broken God's law. They have violated his standards.
That's right.
And I said, look, Kyle, a person who never violates God's standards will not go to hell.
Will not get punished.
And then, of course, he's sharp. He said, okay, now you're saying something which is impossible, because everybody at some point will violate the standards.
Yes.
Well, yeah, that is very true.
Yeah, but it's relevant to the issue, because his feeling is that there's an injustice. She has been harmed, so why should she go to hell? But that isn't even part of the equation. It's not whether or not she's been harmed. Everybody's been harmed in some measure, some greater than others.
Right.
But it's whether we bring harm. That's the issue, and it's the harm that we bring that we are properly responsible for. Look at, maybe her harm is much, much less than the harm of the man who murdered her in the illustration. He will get a greater condemnation, a greater punishment. The duration is going to be the same, separation from God, but the punishment will be different. She will get less. She will only pay for the crimes she's committed, such as they are.
So it is correct in saying, and I've seen this in Scripture many times, that Scripture alludes to levels of hell or levels of punishment commensurate with the crime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a basic principle of justice, a lex talionis, that we get in the Old Testament, the law of the claw, that is, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, isn't a revenge ethic, it's a justice ethic. You make the punishment commensurate with the crime. And we see this also played out in the New Testament. Jesus' statements to Pilate, for example, the one who delivered you over to me has the greater sin, probably referring to the chief priests there. He comes to Capernaum and he says, you've seen these miracles Sodom and Gomorrah never saw. You're going to have a greater judgment than they.
Right.
And so you've been given more revelation, you have more responsibility. So definitely there is no question in my mind at all that the biblical teaching is that there are various levels of punishment, just as various levels of reward in heaven that will be commensurate for each individual. So is it an ugly truth that a person can lead a miserable life and die and go to hell? It's a terrible, ugly truth. But that doesn't mean it's not a truth.
Right.
Nevertheless, and this is a phrase sometimes we should use frequently, or maybe more than we do. Nevertheless, I understand it is an ugly thing. I don't like it any more than you do. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean it isn't going to happen.
Right.
If we have good reason to believe that there is a God who has mercifully reached down to you, Kyle, to make an offer of forgiveness for whatever crimes you've committed against him, then, that we don't like what happens to people who don't receive the forgiveness for whatever reason doesn't change the fact that justice is due them and due us. And what's the real issue at the end of his life, and you probably have said something like this to me, and this isn't to dismiss the objection, but it is to put things in perspective. The real issue is not what happens to that person who seems to be treated unjustly by our measure in the moment. What really matters is what will we do with the crimes that we have against God. Is there a God And we have lots of good reasons to believe so, and nothing that Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens has said in the least wise nullifies that notion. And did he show himself through Jesus, who rose from the dead? We have every reason from concrete historical evidence to believe that. That means what Jesus said is true, that one day we're going to stand before him as a judge and give an account. And if he's our judge instead of our advocate, we're going to be in big trouble. And that's reality. So,
all right, thank you so much.
It's a hard issue, and it's especially difficult when your children are involved. I know the struggle it must be for you, Gary, but I can never guarantee to anybody that a clear characterization of the truth is going to be ultimately persuasive to somebody. I do think it's valuable that you continue doing what you're doing. You communicate clearly the truth to your son, and you empathize with his concerns. I feel the same way about hell. It's a bummer, man. Think about people. Yeah, they are born into dismal circumstances. They live a miserable life. They die and go to hell. They die a wretched death and then go to hell. I mean, this is not a pretty picture, but it is the world that Jesus came to redeem, and there is a solution for it. Maybe not for that girl that he has, conveniently constructed this scenario for, but we can construct all kinds of other scenarios that demonstrate the greatness of the mercy of God, and make
and Greg, just real quick thing. I have seen many circumstances that look absolutely horrendous to me on the outside, and then when the person themselves describes the circumstance, and I'm thinking about the Lost Boys, they talk about the mercy and grace of God reaching them in unbelievably horrible circumstances, and that's what a hypothetical situation always leaves out.
That's exactly right. You are exactly right on that. We cannot see everything, and I think you are wise to communicate that to your son. And giving some of these illustrations, I think, are helpful, because there are those people who went through horrendous circumstances but understood, and it wasn't that they were rescued from their circumstance and now they're living in a palace. They were rescued from their own sin. That's what they realized. They were rescued from their own sin and what they deserved, regardless of the difficulty or hardship or torment they might have experienced. And I'm telling you, there's a whole lot of that out there.
Sure.
And it's true for the Lost Boys of the Sudan, as well as your rank and file person in Poughkeepsie, New York. Life is hard and then you die. And that's true for all of us, but that does not negate our individual responsibility for the hardness of life and the responsibility we have before God. And even though we don't understand everything, he has reached down with grace and mercy to give us help and rescue us from this circumstance. And we would be wise to do the smart thing, and that is to accept the kind hand of mercy, wouldn't you think?
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
So all the best for your son, Kyle, and stay in those good conversations with him.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Okay. It's good talking to you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow. Really significant conversations, huh? Well, there you have it, friends. That's it for our day. I'm exhausted, but it's a good exhaustion. Okay, thank you for joining me. I do hope you podcast the show, because you don't want to miss anything. If you're just catching an hour, there are lots of hours like this that you may not get on your own broadcast. Go to str.org, sign up for that, or you can go to iTunes, YouTube iTunes. You can go to iTunes and get it there. All right, friends, sorry about the calls I wasn't able to get to here today, but thank you for the ones I was. It was good talking to you. I'm Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason. Give 'em heaven this week. All right? Bye-bye now.